Okay, well, thank you so much for taking your time tonight. We have an impressive panel. We have a lot of knowledge here about ADUs and real estate. Again, for those of you who are just walking in virtually, my name is Zach Corser. I'm president of Housing Claremont. To tell you a little bit about us, Housing Claremont, we're here to educate, advocate, and connect. We want to educate the community about housing options and affordable housing and the crisis that affects California, our region, and our city. And this event tonight is very much about that, trying to bring more attention and give people some meaningful tools by which we can do something to make more affordable and available housing here in our own communities. Part of that, too, is about advocacy. We're here to advocate on behalf of affordable housing and bringing more affordable housing opportunities to Claremont and the region. And we're here to connect. We're here to connect the community to these kinds of issues and discussions so that, like, for instance, as we're recording and creating a web page, that we're not just doing sort of one-offs, we're creating some kind of resource for the community where people can learn and hopefully, again, do more to meet the crisis that we're facing, which is grave. It's not getting any better. Housing prices continue to rise in California and across the country, but California is particularly affected. And there's much more that we can all do to bring more diversity to the kinds of housings that are offered, to do more to make more cost-effective and affordable housing. And that's kind of the premise for tonight's panel is what can we do here in a city like Claremont to increase housing opportunities? And so what we're going to be talking about are ADUs or additional dwelling units. And joining us tonight, we have a number of people. First, I want to acknowledge Ilse Lund, who's our vice president. Ilse has done a tremendous job in helping to put this all together for us tonight in terms of invites and making sure that the trains run on time. So many thanks to Ilse for that and everything else she's been doing for us. Also on our board and our treasurer is Monique Ott, who will be speaking to us tonight about the real estate advantages of building an ADU on your property. And then we're very fortunate to be joined by a couple of Claremont's busiest city staff members, Brad Johnson, who is the head of community development, and also Chris Veers, who is our city planner. They're going to be they're the true brain trusts here tonight. So as we get through talking about questions, they're going to be a real help to us all, I hope and expect, in terms of answering some of the questions. But I hope by the end of tonight's hour, it's just an hour long, presentation, that you'll walk away learning a lot more about what ADUs are, what you can do to build one, and hopefully, we'll also give you a chance to ask some questions. In fact, as we roll through the presentation, this is a webinar format, so you'll just be seeing our shining faces here for the hour. But in the last 20 minutes, we're going to turn it over to you to ask us questions that you might have about building ADUs or anything ADU related. So with that, let's get started. One of the things I wanted to talk about right at the beginning is, in looking at ways in which we can connect the community in learning about ADUs, there really wasn't a sort of central resource for learning about what an ADU is, how do you build it, what are the circumstances here in Claremont. So one of the initiatives that Housing Claremont has undertaken over the last year is to put together a website of ADU resources. And so this webinar is partially about that, and also to introduce this site and sort of walk you through it, because we think it's a really good introduction to the idea of what an ADU is and how you can do it here in Claremont. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you this web page. So first off, this is our Housing Claremont website. If you want to learn more about who we are and what we do, I encourage you to take a look just at the website itself. It's housingclaremont.org. You can see our recent news and information, things like our event that's happening today. You can learn a little bit about the team, everyone who is on our board and is participating. Like Lynn Marcinich, Nancy Trezer Osgood, the Reverend Jean Boutillier, and also our Housing Claremont Fellows who helped us this year in putting together this ADU website. We also do housing project evaluations if you want to learn about upcoming or past housing developments and sort of what Housing Claremont thought in terms of advocacy. You can go there and learn more. But tonight's really about our Claremont ADU guide. So first off, what are ADUs about by the numbers if we look at the city of Claremont? Well, one thing is that it's growing. Interest is growing in ADUs, and more are being permitted. In fact, I was just talking to Chris before we got started. He looked at some historical numbers, and Chris, what's been the growth in like the last 5 years of permitted ADUs in Claremont?
It's quite a bit. As you know, the states changed their codes a couple of times that direct cities to revise ADUs to actually make it easier to apply. And I think that's created a buzz and generated more applications. So going back for the last 6 years since 2016, these are calendar years, applications received for ADUs in the city of Claremont. 2016 and 17, we received 0 applications for an ADU. In 2018, we received 1. In 2019, we received 23. That was after the first revised by the state, and a partial year of our, we had a partial year of an updated ordinance that then got revised again in 2020 to make things even easier for ADUs. So in 2020, we went again. In 2019, we were at 23. In 2020, we were at 32. And in 2021, so far, we've got about a month left. We were at 42 applications for ADUs. So it's growing quickly and creating, as I said, more interest and a fair number of new ADU units in the city. But it's also a number that if you multiply that out by 8 or 10, it's not going to be overwhelming to our community, which has about 13,000 housing units at this time.
Great. Well, I like how you've pointed out a couple things too, that it's gotten relatively easier to create and build an ADU on your property thanks to the state. And I'll talk about some state resources where you can learn more about current state laws and regulations about ADUs. But it's really encouraging that we've seen 40 plus permitted in Claremont in 2021, and hopefully we'll see many more in 2022. So I suppose I should roll to the obvious question is, we tend to get jargony when we talk housing. There's a lot of abbreviations and acronyms, from NIMBYs to ADUs. You may wonder what it all means. So just to clear the air on what an ADU is, it's an accessory dwelling unit. I don't know I never heard this term before I started getting into ADUs, but apparently people called them granny flats once upon a time, which seems weird and insulting to me, but that's okay. But essentially, it's a small backyard home, something like you can see pictured here where it says detached ADU. It can sometimes be a converted garage where you take an existing structure and you rehabilitate it into an ADU. Sometimes it can be attached to a house. There's also a form of ADUs called junior accessory dwelling units. And the difference between an ADU and a JADU is that JADUs are built within the walls of an existing single family residence. So that is also an option. It doesn't necessarily have to be unattached from the house. It can actually be part of or inside the house. And I should also mention too that, there's some new proposed single family construction in Claremont, but ADUs can be part of the construction of a new home as well. You can, you don't have to build a detached ADU. You can build it as part of the plans for a new home. And I know that's something that's been discussed in some of the housing projects around Claremont. So what are some reasons to consider an ADU? Well, we'll be talking about many of them tonight. It's from Chris's numbers, we can see, at least here in Claremont, I think it's an increased ease of permitting, but also an increased interest and desire of people to rethink how they think about their properties. That, we can bring more residents to Claremont without really changing much about Claremont, other than diversifying the kinds of housing that's available here. And there are a number of advantages to building an ADU. One, of course, is that it's a source of income for the homeowner. If you rent out your additional dwelling unit, you can essentially, pay for it. So it can pay for itself and more over time. It also increases the value and desirability of your home. Although, I feel like I'm already stealing Monique's thunder, but we'll get to the real estate advantages a little bit later. Of course, it increases the availability of affordable housing. Diverse housing stocks is part of this whole puzzle of affordable housing. There can be everything from, larger single family homes on a large plot to apartment buildings. And ADUs are a way in which we can diversify and make more options available for people that tend to be more affordable. They also tend to be more sustainable as well. And the hope is, in the end, that by building more ADUs in a community like Claremont, we can actually make an impact on California's housing shortage. So that's the reason why Housing Claremont's interested in this, and that's why we're here talking about it tonight. So Chris had also mentioned that California has made a number of different changes to regulation and laws about additional dwelling units. If you want to learn more about that, the California Department of Housing and Community Development has a handbook that I think is a good resource. It's last updated in December of last year. So it's maybe getting a little long in the tooth at this point. But it is a good, I think, resource to learn a little bit about the jargon related to ADUs, what's an ADU, what's a JADU, to learn about the state laws relating to ADUs, how they've changed recently, to get a better sense of what you can do and what the state is trying to do and what the state of play is regarding additional dwelling units. So if you want to learn about that, just click the button, read the guide. But the big question that I'm hoping all of you are having is, what do I need to get started building an ADU in the city of Claremont? Well, we've tried to provide that resource for you. I'm going to scroll down here a little bit. And this is sort of the heart of what we're offering up here, is this narrative on planning your ADU. So we try to give you some details, and we'll continue to update this as we move along. But we've basically broken down planning an ADU into 6 different parts, really maybe even 7. The first part is thinking about design of an ADU. The second is thinking about construction plans. The third is about financing. The fourth is about permitting and fees. The fifth is installation, or the actual building of the structure. And then we also have a frequently asked questions section that contains some things that hopefully people are curious or interested about as they work their way through this page and start asking questions about how they could do this themselves. So the first aspect is design. Design is an important aspect of ADU planning, particularly as Claremont requires that they must duplicate the appearance of the main house in which they're built. I think we're all aware of our architecture commission and the time and energy that goes into design and architecture here in the city of Claremont. And so it's, we need to pay attention to things like making sure that plans are compatible with the existing property, that projects, again, should be of the same style, material, colors, and quantity as was used for the primary dwelling. And, Claremont, I know Brad had mentioned that it's an option to consider. We don't have any of these right now, but just for the purposes of getting you thinking, we've offered this webpage that gives some free ADU floor plans that come from other California cities. Now, these are not approved for use in Claremont. These are simply for informational purposes to sort of get your juices flowing in terms of what your particular design could look like. But this is a pretty interesting, useful website of floor plans if you don't have an architect. And it lists all different sizes, all different configurations. It talks about what city it came from. It gives a description of sort of the what it was created for. And it goes through and it gives you some other ideas about sort of approaching building an ADU. So consider it a resource to sort of get you started. But again, it's not a list of pre-approved plans for the city of Claremont. Chris or Brad, do you have thoughts about design and ADU in Claremont?
Yeah, I mean, your comment about having to have an architect, I mean, is also true of not having to have an engineer. When you're just talking 1 and 2 story wood frame construction buildings, you know, a simple designer can design it if they know what the building codes are. And they know how to do a design it and put the right details into the plan. You can save yourself the expense of not having to hire, you know, a very high-end expensive architectural and engineering firm. So the rules are under the building codes pretty loose to allow designers to create those kind of documents for homeowners. And homeowners can be owner builder. They don't need, you know, they could actually pull the permit themselves. And I know people that have, you know, put their tool belt on themselves and you know, you got to be a little brave to take that on yourself. But again, small buildings like this don't have to be real complicated or real expensive from a design sense. Although in today's world that we live in, obviously labor and materials have skyrocketed and, you know, come down a little bit. So they are not inexpensive. But if you look at, you know, the pricing of a JADU versus a ground up, you know, detached building, there's a huge cost differential. So there's options to get different costs.
Great, thank you.
I can note just about design. You mentioned the Architectural Commission. Actually, the intent of the state code is to make the approval of ADUs ministerial, which means that we don't have that discretionary review of having to go to the Architectural Commission. That's the good news. The bad news is that the design needs to essentially match the existing home, which can be kind of limiting. We've seen a few designs that have some slight upgrades or modifications. We don't want to prevent people from making good design choices, but at the same time, if you have this concept of buying something from the back of Dwell magazine and putting it in your backyard and you live in a historic neighborhood, that's going to be a problem because, again, our code, in order to make it ministerial, the easiest thing was for us to write in requirements that we match the colors, materials, roof lines, windows, and doors of the existing home.
Okay, so it doesn't go to the Architecture Commission, but you still have a ministerial review of the design plans. That's
and it's essentially, does it match the main house? And if you do that, it's a very simple review process done at the staff level.
Okay, great. Moving on, talking about construction plans, we'll talk about the more detailed packet of information that the city requires as part of your ADU application. But, as you're thinking about, construction plans, particularly if you're more the do-it-yourselfer, think about what's going to be required here. You'll need, in terms of construction plans, things like a site plan, which shows all existing and proposed structures, parking, if required, and existing mature trees. And speaking of parking, what is the regulation, Chris and Brad, about ADUs and parking?
It depends on whether you are within a half mile of a transit zone, a walking distance of a transit zone. If you have I don't think we have a lot of these in Claremont, but if you have a car share program within a block, there's also some very relaxed rules on the type of parking that historically cities have required fully enclosed 2-car garages. Claremont's at least required carports. The flexibility that the state legislature brought down to California cities and this is probably one of the more extreme examples. If you have a 2-car garage and you want to convert that to an ADU, you don't have to build another 2-car garage for the main house. You can actually provide 1 parking stall for the new ADU, the 2 required stalls for the existing single family home. And those can be essentially located in any configuration on the property. We encourage them to be covered, with a carport or a garage, but it's not mandatory. So it could simply be paving a new part of your property that allows 3 cars to be there now, whether that's, even tandem. We try to encourage them to be in side yards and rear yards so we don't get, full paving of a front yard. And so we work with designers to not allow that, but yeah, the rules are much more relaxed on parking across the state now.
I think I'll also note that in our experience, most cases are a typical home in Claremont usually has at least 3 spaces in front of what is the existing garage. So typically we haven't had to require any sort of additional parking, but there will be lots in certain locations in Claremont where trying to provide that 3rd space for the additional unit will come into play. It's just not very often.
Thank you. Great. I'm sure people had questions about that, and there might be more during the Q&A. That's helpful. You'll also need a floor plan of the proposed ADU and of the existing structure if the project is an ADU conversion, and also an elevation plan that details exterior features such as siding material, doors, windows, roof, trim, gutters, recesses, vents, and other exterior finish details. So, there are a fair amount of plans that are necessary for doing this, but it's all outlined in the ADU application process. And if you have questions about any of those, you can ask those at the end of the hour. So moving on to the big question of financing and cost. There's lots of ways to finance an ADU, and we've given you some options down here, some ways to think about it, whether it's you're thinking about a home equity loan, cash out refinancing using cash or a construction loan, personal line of credit, investments. There's all sorts of ideas here about ways in which you can approach paying for an ADU. The question is, what is it going to cost? So, it depends on a number of different factors. Looking at LA County as a whole, larger ADUs, those that are more than about 1,200 square feet, have an average construction cost of about $225,000. Smaller ADUs in the county cost about when I mean smaller, I mean 500 square foot, about 110. But Brad was really helpful in giving us some examples of recently constructed ADU projects that kind of gives you a diversity of ideas about what's it going to cost. In the city of Claremont, you can see, costs can be as little as this JADU of 300 square feet that was $37,500, or a larger ADU, standalone new construction that was 700 square feet that ended up costing almost $200,000. So it varies, and you can see what goes into it. There's the contractor cost, building fees, engineering fees, school fees, architect fees. There's a lot of fees that can add up. And we'll talk more about what these fees are and what they're for. Brad, do you have any more thoughts about the cost of building an ADU?
No, I mean, obviously, if costs can be extremely different depending on the type of fixtures and finishes. We see some, very exotic examples on some properties and some very minimal examples on other properties. These numbers are probably more in the minimal category that you see on the screen. But again, yeah, if you're doing super fine finishes and fixtures, that could always add to the cost. But no, I think you did a good job explaining it.
And just to add, oh, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Just to add to that, I want to mention a couple things. One, the good news is the state's made it really easy to build ADUs, but that on the bad news side, they really do require that these be pretty functional, independent units. So the kitchen requirements, you need to basically have a nearly full kitchen, which is expensive on a per square foot basis. And you actually have to have a laundry closet, so individual laundry. So that would be for just a small space that could even just have a stackable washer and dryer, but that needs to be installed. So it costs more. And I think I should add about JADUs. The state gave cities the discretion that in their definition of a JADU that they could require that that they incorporate an existing bedroom in the home. And we have that in our code. So it's important to know that if you're going to do a JADU, you have to have an available bedroom that you're going to be utilizing.
Okay, that's a detail I wasn't aware of. That's good to know.
Yeah, that trips up some of our potential applicants. And I guess I would say The good news about JADUs, if it works out right for you, is you don't have to put in as many of those more expensive amenities, the full kitchen. Bathroom isn't even required. Actually, you could have a shared bathroom and you wouldn't have to do the laundry closet.
Okay.
So,
Oh, just a quick question about this last one, existing house split. What is that exact, what kind of design is that for an ADU?
So that's where you're actually taking a portion of your house and not building out a junior ADU, which is 500 square feet or less, but actually taking a portion of your house and making it a full ADU with the full kitchen, full sanitary disposal systems. So that is an option as well.
yeah, you just subject, if you have a 4,000 square foot house, you're only going to be able to do a maximum 1,000 square foot for your ADU. That doesn't change. And that would be for a 2-bedroom ADU. If you're doing a 1-bedroom ADU, the maximum for that you could split off from your house would be 800 square feet.
Okay. Thanks. Perfect. Monique, I know I'm sort of eating into your time. Do you mind if I just finish up these next few points and then I'll turn it over to you at the bottom of the hour? Okay, thanks. So permitting. So before you start building, you're going to need a building permit and other approvals from the city. And the city will need plans of your project, and they need to determine if the project conforms to zoning regulations, if the design is appropriate, as we've talked about, if it's safe and up to code. And so there's a number of things that are required. You'll see a link down here to the Claremont ADU permit. It's a PDF form that's available from the city. It's also on the Planning Division's website. This is the most up-to-date one. And it goes through and explains, essentially a summary of standards for building this, gives you an outline of what's required for submission. But there's a lot that goes into it. We've talked about site, floor, and elevation plans. You'll also need a title report, a statement describing the intended occupant, and an estimated monthly rent, a landscaping plan for the area adjacent to the second unit. Do you, Chris or Brad, I'm going to assume that a lot of this is kind of straightforward and in the permit, but is there anything that people get tripped up on or should know about this application process?
Mostly it's that people come in, they bring in plans and they don't have the full build out of an ADU under the state code's definition. So we've got, a lot of times it's the laundry closet that they haven't put in. I'll note there's something here about a statement describing the intended occupant. That's really for us, just data collection. Who are we housing in these ADUs? We're finding that in Claremont, a lot of it is family members.
And then there are a number of fees to consider. We talked about some of them above when we were detailing what it costs to build an ADU, but as you go through the process, you should be aware that there are fees that are collected by the City of Claremont. We've detailed some of them. You might have seen or noticed that the initial ADU application now has a charge of $918, and there are other fees as well. But again, as you're going through and sort of thinking about what this is going to cost, be sure to be aware of the fees so you can build that into the total cost. Thoughts about fees, Chris or Brad?
Yeah, I'll note that at least 2/3 of our applications are exempt from that $918 planning permit fee. Most of that we get are under the state's definition of 800 square feet. Once you exceed that 800, the city can and does charge that $918 fee, but the bulk of our applications are not subject to that fee. It's
Okay.
like 90%.
It's good to know. Great. There's some thoughts about installations and there's some frequently asked questions, but I don't want to delay Monique any further. I'll get back to these FAQs in a minute, but Monique, do you want to tell us a little bit about the advantages from a real estate perspective of building an ADU on your property?
Yes, I have put together I did some higher and more involved research on what the market is actually doing. And so I put together a presentation on that, and I'm going to share that with everyone. So I'm Monique H. Ott, and I'm a member of the Housing Claremont. I'm also a member of the Citrus Valley Association of Realtors, and I'm the owner of Hot Homes Real Estate and Property Management. I also do some volunteer work here in Claremont for Claremont AY. So I do know Claremont very well, but I also understand the property management aspect as well as the resale aspect, which is what I think makes me uniquely able to talk about this. So I'm going to touch on the impacts of ADUs on property values as well as rental income potential. And I'm going to show you real numbers of what that looks like that will help you to make a better decision as to whether or not financially this is something that you will want to be motivated to do. But this would be the motivation of why it's so beneficial to a lot of us Claremont residents to really think about and possibly implement an ADU on your property. So as we all know, the obvious impact is that your property value will go up. There's only one home in Claremont that's actually sold in the last 6 months. I'm going to share a case study of that, as well as I went ahead and looked at a home outside of Claremont because I want to show the benefit. But what I showed in both properties is that there's over $100,000 increase in your property value. And I know that sounds crazy. That's why I went outside of Claremont to see if those were real numbers. There was a home in South Claremont with an ADU. So here you have the main property, and then adjacent to it, they did a garage conversion on this home. The home was listed in July 15th, 2021, and it sold in 7 days. The 7 days is significant, but the other number that we're all interested in is what did it sell for? And it sold for over $900,000. Down below is a picture of what the kitchen looked like. So Chris, you mentioned how it has to be a fully functional kitchen. This is a pretty robust kitchen. And then this does have a 1-bedroom as well as a shared, like a living room through this door. So when I went ahead and I looked at the average amount that a 3-bedroom home sold for in the last 6 months, it sold for $796,000. It was also on the market for an average number of days of 18 days. So a home with an ADU, this home sold for over $100,000 more than the average 3-bedroom home sold in South Claremont. I went ahead and went outside of our city just because I thought it was such an unbelievable number that I wanted to show you that this is specific to an ADU. So I looked to see if Upland had any ADUs that had recently sold, and they did. A bedroom was converted to an ADU. It was listed on June 17th, 2020. It sold in 8 days for $880,000. So the average sale price for a home over the last 6 months was $743,000. They're typically on the market for 20 days. So in contrast to 8 days, the other one in Claremont sold in 7 days. So we're seeing that they significantly sell. They're on the market for less number of days. And again, this ADU sold for over $100,000 more than the average 3-bedroom home sold in North Upland. I think that's significant. And it's, I'm sure I would see the same trend if from city to city to city. But you told me I had 5 minutes, so I only did 2 cities. So now I want to talk about the rental income potential. And I have to tell you, this is what I love about real estate. It's about using resources to be able to afford what we could not afford otherwise. So there's a lot of people who purchase homes. They know that there is another property on there that could provide them income, and that helps them to be able to afford their mortgage. And I think that's really exciting, and it gives more people the ability to buy a home, which is, I think, I see through my clients that it's their dream to be able to own a home. And these ADUs definitely make them more able to be able to buy that home. So this same home in Claremont, or ADU in Claremont, it currently rents, this is an actual real number, but it rents for $1,525. The rental range in South Claremont, I'm sorry, this is actually just Claremont. In Claremont is between $1,200 and $1,700 per month. So again, we have the sales price. And then if you were to finance 80% of that, that would be $720. Your mortgage payment will be around $4,000. Now, because my advice as a professional, I would advise for people to put a little bit more down. So I scratched out this example and I started over. So I made it a little bit more tangible for a lot of people. A lot of people right now do have more money to put down. I always recommend trying to stay around the $3,000 a month mortgage because of emergencies that happen in our lives, lost employment or whatever. I just don't like to see those $4,000 marks for a monthly mortgage payment. So I went ahead and made it a little bit more attainable. So if you were financing $500,000, your monthly payment would be $2,800 for your mortgage payment. If you had a renter come in for, with that $1,525, you're basically only paying $1,275 a month. So that's an incredible savings that makes it so attainable to be able to buy something. And obviously, yes, you can finance much more because you have the ADUs, but just when I see the $4,000 a month, I like to make it more of a digestible number. So I always suggest that you basically put these ADUs on the market for realistic numbers, because the lower the rents are, we increase the likelihood of finding the cream of the crop tenants. This means that tenants that will pay on time, that are basically they have better FICO scores, and they're much more reliable tenants. That when we start, blasting out, higher numbers in rents and making it less affordable, you end up unfortunately finding less desirable tenants. So say, for instance, you made it a much more reasonable amount, say $1,000 a month obligation for your tenants, then you still have, you're still paying under $2,000 a month for a beautiful 3 or 4 bedroom home. And I think that's really incredible, because it's hard to find that here in Claremont. So I went ahead and did the same analysis with the North Upland home, and we're seeing the same thing. For this one, if you financed $500,000, you're looking at $2,800 a month. And so with a renter in place, you could be paying $1,500 a month for the same home. So again, I just want to reiterate, the lower the rents, usually you find better tenants, because you can actually really research those tenants and put somebody in there that you would find would be safe living next to you. I know that a lot of parents with children, they get very anxious about having an ADU because they think about who's going to be the tenant. But so it is much more desirable to put a very valuable, good, responsible tenant in there, rather than somebody that may not pay rent, or maybe doesn't have, isn't a good fit for your family. So before, just lowering the rents helps you to find a better tenant. So if you have any questions about anything that I've discussed, don't hesitate to call, reach out, ask us, but we're here to help. And thank you very much, Zach. Do you guys have any questions for me?
We'll leave that for our participants, or rather our attendees, in a few minutes. If they have any questions, they can ask you. But thanks so much, Monique. I think you've helped to demonstrate how this can be a win-win for property owners and for renters. We've got a couple more minutes before we go to Q&A. So I thought, I don't want to put you on the spot, Brad, but I know you had a couple of updates and ideas about ADUs that you'd mentioned. Do you want to just roll through a couple of ideas about ADUs in Claremont before we take Q&A?
I just want to add kind of a converse argument that Monique just talked about. You may have an example where a senior, maybe an empty nester living by themselves in this, 4,000 square foot, 4-bedroom home, and they don't need that kind of space. They may not want to leave their property. These laws allow the ADU to be occupied by the owner and the main house to be rented out also. So that's another, just converse of that, where let's say, I don't know, an elderly person that's living alone that may not need that much square footage could benefit by living in a brand new unit in the backyard and not have to leave the neighborhood they love and age in place. I guess I just wanted to make a comment about, Chris mentioned projections earlier, and the regional housing needs assessment requires that the city plan for slightly over 2,000 units to be at least zoned for in the city and planned for over the upcoming 8 years. Historically, the state has required city planners to go interview the occupants or the owners and figure out what income categories they are to be able to take credit for that. Well, the Southern California Association of Governments last year in June did a county-wide survey of LA County and Area 2, where Claremont is. We're automatically guaranteed now a certain number of those units to be eligible for us to report out at the low, very low, extremely low, and moderate levels. So, the total number we're projecting is nearly 400, and 238 of those would be for low income occupants, 12% or 12 units at moderate, 238 at low, and 134 above moderate. So it's nice that the state has baked in a formula. The city could be more aggressive, but we'll likely use the formula that was based on this countywide study of what rents are, and to be able to take credit for all these anticipated new ADUs in the city. Oh, and just one final thought is, the last few times we've brought the housing element to the city council for adoption, they have verbalized to us a very strong desire to come up with the city program that incentivizes the buildings of these, because the building of ADUs, because as you saw from those numbers, they are not inexpensive. So we will, I'm sure, continue to get questioned by the community and asked by the city council to come up with some housing programs in our next housing element that will incentivize owners to be able to get some financial assistance to move forward with production of these.
Great. Thanks for that, Brad. Well, we're heading towards the top of the hour, and I see we've already got a couple of questions in the hopper here. Ilsa, do you want to help manage the questions and the Q&A? And so if you have questions, you can enter them in Q&A, or you can raise your hand, and we'll get started. So I see a couple of questions.
Sure. So Rose, I can go ahead and ask your question, but if you'd like to ask yourself, then feel free to raise your hand. But Rose is wondering if there is a change in setbacks and easements to ADUs.
I can answer that unless Brad wants to take it. The state actually mandated that the setback for ADUs be permitted to be within 4 feet of rear and side interior side property lines. It doesn't affect front yard setbacks or street side yard setbacks. So that would be the case of a corner lot. So that's smaller than our typical setbacks for residential properties. In the historic Claremont, that we're at 5 feet. And in most of our other single family detached neighborhoods, the side and rear yard setbacks are 8 feet. So you can build an ADU under state code closer to the property line. However, once you get within 5 feet, it's a trade-off. You end up having to spend more fireproofing, and you're limited on wall penetrations, doors and windows that you can put on the side of the building because of fire code. So while 4 is possible, and we've seen some, 5 is the more practical setback that you get with an ADU. As for easements, one of the reasons we require the title reports is, yes, we're conscious of easements, and if you're building a detached ADU, you can't build it in an easement. So I'm not sure exactly what the question was getting at, but the answer is, if you have an existing easement, say for utilities, that's the sort of thing that we're going to want you not to build on, and that's just a regular real estate practice. And in terms of separate utilities, you can do either approach. You can have a single utility feeding both units on the lot, or you can do separate. We don't compel separate meters, and we'll allow either option.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rose, for that question. Looks like we've got some more popping up here in the chat.
Yes, there is a question about from Richard about restrictions to selling or renting the property. Does the homeowner need to live on property to rent out a junior ADU?
So I'm thinking that might be to me. So in terms of selling, it is preferred that's permitted. Basically, that will affect the appraisal amount. So if it's permitted, then it can be counted in the appraised value. If it's not permitted, it will negatively impact the appraised value. So in terms of lending, you'll have an issue with the selling. In terms of renting the property, I don't think there's any mandate, unless Brad or Chris, you know of anything that I don't know, but if the junior ADU is actually separated, then it's my understanding that they would be able to rent it and not have to live in the dwelling, correct?
Yeah, Brad, if you want to take it, you're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, currently the Claremont rules is it has to be an owner occupied property. So the owner has to live in one of the available units on the property. I think there is a piece of state legislation that's already been proposed out there to change that, to take that ability away from cities to mandate that the owner live on property. So yeah, there's another more controversial bill out there, SB 9, where you could actually build, 2 duplexes on a property, and the owner would have to live there for a minimum of 3 years. So that's a much more controversial piece of legislation that all the cities are really struggling to understand right now. And but yeah, we'll see if that changes in the near future.
And are there restrictions on short-term rentals? So if someone were to build an ADU and list it on Airbnb, is that restricted in Claremont?
It is. It's not allowed currently. We are bringing something forward for the community in the first quarter of next year to talk about short-term rentals and potentially allowing them in some fashion and regulation. But we'll see how the community responds to that, and ultimately the city council would have to make a change to our city code. So prohibited for now.
Thank you. Bill Dodge is asking what type of incentives is Claremont considering to foster building ADUs for low and moderate income renters?
We really haven't gotten far down that road yet, so I can't really speak to that. When it did come to the city council, either the last revision or the revision before, they did drop the park land fee down in half. So that schedule of fees you saw earlier, that's actually half of what our parkland fee is for a single family home. But those are ideas that we're going to need to come up with in the coming months. So any ideas from the public, we strongly encourage people to bring those forward.
Yeah, and I'll just take the opportunity to mention that one thing that Housing Claremont has been working on in parallel to the website is to come up with a number of different strategies to do just this. There's been a number of strategies that cities and counties across California have taken on to help incentivize these properties being offered as affordable housing. So we'll be coming out with a report that we'll be putting in front of the community and the city. So be looking out for that.
Thanks, Zach. The final question in the chat, and there's one in the Q&A. Would the address be different for a junior ADU? So do ADUs have different street addresses?
Yes. Yeah, we would want a separate address. I don't know if we have anything that like legally compels you to, but that's typical that you would want if you're going to have a tenant, that they would have their own address. So I'm not sure if it's compelled to, but it's desirable, and I think the city would prefer to have that separate address.
And Ilse, it looks like you missed one question in the chat from Richard Haskell. Hi, Richard. It's a question for Monique. Are the rents that you've quoted in the examples likely to qualify as low-income affordable housing?
So thank you, Richard, for this question. In our board meetings with Housing Claremont, we actually discussed this in terms of, is this something that the city would help to make possible, or would it be at the discretion of the owner? And at this point, and correct me, Chris and Brad, if I'm wrong, but right now it really is the onus of the owner to make it more or less affordable, unless some sort of program is provided to really motivate the sellers to make it affordable. But I kind of hinted to that a little bit in my presentation. In my experience, I've been doing property management for so many years. In my experience, when you have lower rental amounts, the quality of your tenant goes up tremendously. And in my opinion, when you have a great tenant versus a bad tenant, when they move out, I can tell you that a poor quality tenant will make up all the difference in repairs that you have to put into that home. So me being an owner who does have rentals, I advocate more on the lower side of rentals to make sure that it's affordable, and I can be more at ease that I'm going to be putting in a very high quality tenant. So
Brad, you know the RENA standards. What would be considered a low income rental for an ADU? What threshold?
So it's based on the number of bedrooms. So there's a different price maximum for studios versus 1 bedroom versus 2 bedroom. I won't talk about 3 bedroom because we don't allow that many bedrooms. But so if we're looking at low income, which is 60% of area median income, if it's a studio, the maximum the rent would be $792, 1 bedroom $897. 1 bedroom, and then 2 bedroom $1,000. So I think Monique was talking about 1 bedroom units probably. So it's that 1,000 even a little higher than the low income category. If we're to drop down to very low, that 1 bedroom would be the maximum allowable rent would be $737. Extremely low, $417. But if you get up to the moderate income, which still allows cities to take credit for new units under RENA, the maximum for a 1 bedroom could go up to about $1,700 a month. So it sounds like it fits in the moderate category.
Okay, thanks, Brad. That's helpful. And thanks for the question, Richard. We've got a couple more questions here. Ilse, I'm stealing your thunder. I'll be quiet now.
Oh. So Rose has asked in the Q&A, is there any change to the percentage of dwelling that can be built on a lot?
Yeah, the code wants ADUs to comply with lot coverage and floor area standards. However, if an ADU is under 800 square feet, we still permit it. So the reality is you don't have to meet lot coverage standards as long as your ADU is 800 square feet in area or less.
Thank you. Then Jonathan has asked, does the City of Claremont allow second-story ADUs, for instance, on the top of a detached garage?
No. So that was a conscious choice. We've been debating this with our planning commission and architectural commissions for several years now. And while it seems like a convenient place, and I think that's kind of where that granny flat term came from, was the flat over the garage space. The drawback is a lot of garages are, if you think about them, they're in backyards, they're built on older homes, especially very close to the property lines. They tend to have sight lines straight into the backyard of the neighbors. And so our conclusion was that we were going to restrict them to 1 story.
Chris, if I could piggyback maybe a question onto that as well. If a homeowner doesn't want to meet a standard, they can go through a non-ministerial process, right? And come before the Architectural Commission through a public hearing process that may be much more criticized by neighbors, or at least critiqued by neighbors. And so if there was an owner that really wanted to push the envelope on one of these standards, they could, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but potentially apply to the Architectural Commission and say, I want to waiver from standard XYZ, and go through the public hearing process.
Yeah, you were right a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. But when we passed the new code in February 2020, I believe that we were exempted from having any kind of discretionary process. So while we might be able to do that if it was an addition to a home that was already 2 stories, a separate structure, I don't believe we have that. And we haven't seen that. Our answer to people is no, that you cannot. There is no process to do a second-story ADU unless it's part of a existing 2-story home. And even that, we haven't, I mean, it appears that the language in our code would prohibit you from doing that as well. Sorry to be the negative Nancy here.
There's another question about possible incentives. And I know you already spoke briefly to that, Brad, that the city hasn't identified anything specific. Housing Claremont has done a review of what many cities have done in terms of incentives. Examples might include fee waivers, pre-approved plans, cash, straight support to subsidize the building. So there's a lot within the realm of possibility. Zach, you can say more.
Yeah, and I should just mention it. These are more directed towards not necessarily low-income renters, but rather low-income homeowners. But there are state resources for funding ADUs that are available. I think it's unlikely that many in Claremont would qualify for them, but it is worthwhile going to the California Department of Housing Development and looking at some of these incentives, because there are a variety of different programs and monies that are available that aren't offered by the city, but are rather offered by the state. So there are options out there, and if people are interested in learning more, they can reach out to us and we can give you more details about those.
Thanks. Jeff has said in the comment, Jeff, who is a local realtor, often realtors have 3 or 4 generations of families on the same property, needing 1, a main house for an active younger or middle-aged family, 2, a detached ADU for another family member, and 3, a junior ADU for another family member. It would be helpful if the city could be more flexible for the property owner to be able to build out the junior ADU before the current footprint of the original house, versus requiring that the junior ADU be built within the current footprint of the home. This requirement is often needed for all appropriate family members to have their own respective privacy. Sometimes they also have ADA or accessibility needs. That's from Jeff Hamill. So I'm not sure if there's quite a question there, but if Brad or Chris, you have any thoughts on situations like that.
And the solution is to do an addition to the house and then come back in and retrofit with a JADU. I believe that you could build up to 150 additional square feet with, I'm trying to think, in association with a JADU, that you could add 150 square feet to create an entry area, and that might help with the ADA concerns that you have.
Well, we're just 1 minute past the hour of 8 o'clock. So thanks everyone sincerely for joining us tonight. Don't let it stop here. Please feel free to reach out to the city planning division if you have more questions. Take a look at the resources on our webpage. Take a look at the application permit. And again, thank you so much. And hope to see you at another one of these Housing Claremont events, and very much appreciate Chris and Brad, your time. We couldn't have done this without you. You had really great answers, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.